Hello and welcome to our lecture on the importance of math in poker. And I think this is a really important lecture because I really want you to understand why math is important in poker before we really get into the nitty-gritty of the course. Because if you really don't understand why it's so important in poker, then you may not utilize it in your game. So let's go ahead and let's get started. And we'll start with a quote that I have at the top of the slide. And this quote is, "Anybody with a basic knowledge of poker knows that you play the player and not the cards." And so you might have watched some movies such as A Rounder, where Mike McDermott is getting reads and he's basing his plays off his reads against the opponents. Or you might play at a home game, or you might have watched a live pro get reads on their opponents. But lots of people really aren't talking about the math behind everything, right? Lots of people like to base their game based upon reading other opponents, and that's only one side of the game. The other side of the game is the mathematics. So we get reads on our opponents, and when we play the player, we're looking at their tendencies, their playing styles, their reads, and any general tells that we can get upon them. So lots of players like to read people but not use math. But that's one important aspect of the game, but it's not everything. The second aspect is that we use math to supplement our reads and tells. So we understand that we're reading our opponents, but then we use math to make sure that our moves, whether we are betting, we're calling, or we're raising, or we're folding, is the correct mathematical type of a decision at the poker table. So whether we're value betting or we're bluffing, whatever we're doing, we're making that sure that mathematically it's the most profitable move that we're making in the long run. So math ensures that we're making the correct mathematical decision. We use our reads on our opponents to get an idea of the range of hands that they're playing. We then use math to help us make the most profitable decision. And when we're looking at profitable decisions, you'll notice down at the bottom I have in green a plus EV, and in red I have a negative EV. And so when we're talking about poker in general, when people talk about a plus EV play, that means it's a profitable play. And when we're looking at a negative EV play, we're talking about a losing play. And I'll be talking about expected value, which is what EV stands for. I'll be talking about that in a later lecture. So don't worry too much if you've never heard of the concept of EV. I just want to kind of introduce that right now before we got into other lectures as well, because it fits into this lecture. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And I put up a diagram to kind of highlight this. So there's two pieces to the pie. The first one is we're playing the player, so we're getting our reads. The second one is we're using math at the poker table, and we're combining these two together. And we combine them together, we are now a complete poker player. If we take one side out, if we take the math side out, then we're an incomplete poker player. If we're only using reads, we're not using math, so we're not a complete poker player. Now, conversely, if we take this portion out and we're just making all of our moves based upon the mathematics and we're not basing it upon any reads or tells on our opponents, again, we're an incomplete poker player. So the two complement one another, and they're just as important at the poker table to make you a complete poker player. So let's go ahead and conclude this lecture with just some simple examples to highlight poker mathematics. And I just kind of thought about some basic questions that one might ask at the poker table that pertain to poker mathematics. So the first question that you may think to yourself, are we getting the right pot and implied odds to call with a flush or a straight draw? So assume that you are in a hand and you have an open-ended straight draw, or maybe you have a king high flush draw and your opponent is betting into you. Are you getting the right pot odds or implied odds? Well, if you don't know basic poker mathematics, then you don't know that. You may know that he may be bluffing a certain percentage of the time, but do you know the mathematics behind how much you can call, how much you can't call profitably? If you don't know mathematics side of the game, then you can't answer that question. The second question I have listed on the slide is, how much should I bet to give my opponents a bad price to call with a draw? So we're not always in the hand with the worst hand. Lots of time we're in the hand value betting with the best hand. So the question from me to you is that, let's say you have a pair of aces and you're in a hand with an opponent where you suspect that he could potentially have a flush draw. How much do you bet to give him a bad price to call? Do you know what that is? Again, if you don't, then that's something we're going to talk about in this class because that's an important concept as well. And then the last question I have posed on here is, how often do I need to win if I call my opponent's river bet with a hero call? So what we're talking about here is how often do you need to call to be correct? If you're calling as a hero call on the river, if you suspect that somebody's bluffing. And now, again, you need to know basic poker odds, poker mathematics, and once you know that, you can easily figure that out, that, well, if he bets a certain amount, I only have to be right a certain amount to be profitable in the long run. So those are just some, simple examples to highlight why poker math is important at the poker table, in addition to other topics that we talked about previously in this lecture. So what we're going to do now for our next lecture, we're going to break into those essential topics that I talked about. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions that pertain to this lecture, as usual, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next lecture.